My name is Silas Blackwood. I'm 67 now, but the thing I have to tell you about started a little over 5 years ago. I farmed this same piece of land in the foothills of the Appalachians my entire life, just like my father and his father before him. It's about 400 acres of rolling hills, half of it pasture for my cattle, the other half timber that backs up onto thousands of acres of national forest. I know the sounds of this land. I know the smell of a coming rain, the feel of a hard frost on the air before it even settles, the way the deer move when the coyotes are getting bold. I'm a practical man. I believe in what I can see, what I can touch, and what a good day's work can get you. I've never had much time for ghost stories or tales of strange things in the woods. To me, a bump in the night was a raccoon in the chicken coop, and a shadow in the trees was a black bear looking for an easy meal. I'm telling you all this so you understand I'm not the kind of man who goes looking for trouble, and I'm certainly not the kind to make things up. What I experienced, it changed the way I see the world. It broke it, in a way. I know how it's going to sound. I've played it over in my own head 1,000 times, and even I have trouble believing it some days. But it happened, and I feel like I have to tell someone to get it out of my own head before it eats me alive. Before I get into what happened, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I share stories like this regularly. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I always like to know who's listening. All right, let me tell you what happened. It was late October, the kind of autumn where the colors seem to hang on forever, a blaze of orange and red that almost hurts your eyes. But a storm was coming. You could feel it in the pressure of the air, a heavy stillness that made the cows restless. It hit that night, a real gully washer with wind that sounded like a freight train trying to peel the tin roof off the barn. It rained for 2 solid days. When it finally broke, the world was washed clean and smelled of wet earth and pine. The creek that cuts through my back pasture was swollen and brown, running angry and fast. That storm did a number on my fences, so the first thing I did was saddle up my old mare Daisy and ride the line. The back 40 is the wildest part of my property. It's where the pasture gives way to thick woods, all old-growth oak and hickory, with an underbrush so dense you can't see 10 feet in some places. It's quiet back there. The sounds of the highway and the farm get swallowed up by the trees. Usually, it's a good kind of quiet, full of the rustle of squirrels and the calls of birds. But that morning, it was different. It was a dead quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing in on you. Even Daisy was acting skittish, her ears twitching, her head held high, sniffing the air. Birds weren't singing. I couldn't even hear the usual chatter of chipmunks. It was like the woods were holding their breath. That's a sign that a major predator is around. A bear, maybe a mountain lion passing through. I kept my hand near the rifle I had holstered on my saddle, my eyes scanning the tree line. We were near the creek bank, where the storm had done the most damage, washing away a whole section of earth and leaving the roots of a giant sycamore exposed like tangled bones. And that's when I smelled it. It wasn't the smell of a dead deer or a decaying animal, which I'm plenty familiar with. This was a thick, musky, coppery smell. It was wild and wrong. Daisy stopped dead, refusing to go any further, her nostrils flaring. I dismounted, tying her to a low branch, and walked forward, my boots sinking into the soft, muddy ground. The smell got stronger near the washed-out creek bank, and then I saw it. A den, or what was left of one, dug into the earth beneath the sycamore's roots. The storm had collapsed it. Lying half buried in the mud was the body of a she-wolf. At least, that's what my brain told me at first. She was huge, bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen, with coarse, dark fur. But her limbs were too long, her shoulders too broad. Something had gotten to her before the den collapsed. There were deep, vicious claw marks across her back, and her neck was broken at an unnatural angle. Whatever fought her was big and mean. It was a grim sight, but death is part of life out here. I was about to turn away when I heard a sound, a tiny, high-pitched whimper, almost too weak to hear. It was coming from under a piece of the collapsed bank. I got down on my hands and knees, my old joints complaining, and started digging away the mud and roots with my bare hands. And there, curled into a tight, shivering ball, was a pup. It was the strangest-looking thing I'd ever seen. At first glance, it looked like a wolf pup, covered in the same dark, almost black fur as the mother. But it was all wrong. Its head was too round, its snout shorter than a wolf's, and its paws, they were enormous, even for a pup that was clearly going to be a large animal. They were out of all proportion to its body. But the most unsettling thing was the front paws. The digits were long, almost like fingers, with an opposable thumb-like claw set off to the side. My mind tried to rationalize it. A genetic mutation? Some weird coyote-dog hybrid? I knew I should have just left it. Nature is cruel, and its mother was gone. It would die soon enough. That's the way of things. But it looked up at me with these eyes. They weren't the milky blue of a normal pup. They were a clear, intelligent shade of amber, and they looked at me with an awareness that felt ancient. It whimpered again, a sound of pure misery. I've raised livestock my whole life. I've put down sick animals, and I've helped birth new ones. I'm not a soft man, but I couldn't just leave it there to starve. I told myself it was just a strange-looking dog, a freak of nature. I wrapped the shivering thing in my jacket, its little body barely making a lump, and carried it back to Daisy. She shied away from the smell of it, rolling her eyes and snorting, but I calmed her down and managed to get back in the saddle. On the ride back to the farmhouse, the pup didn't make a sound. It just lay in the crook of my arm, a warm, trembling weight against my chest. I had no idea what I was doing. My wife, Martha, had been gone for 10 years, and the house was as quiet as the woods had been that morning. I guess I was lonely, though I'd never have admitted it to anyone. I thought maybe raising a dog would be good for me. Looking back now, I see that for what it was. The biggest mistake of my life. I set it up in the barn, in an empty horse stall with fresh straw and a bowl of warm milk, which it refused. It wouldn't touch it. I tried some softened dog food, same result. Finally, on a hunch, I went to the freezer and got a pound of ground beef I used for my own dinners. I put a small, raw piece on my finger and held it out. The pup sniffed it once, and then its little pink tongue darted out and cleaned my finger off in a flash. It devoured the rest of the meat with a ferocity that was shocking for something so small. I decided to call him Cain, mostly because it was the first name that popped into my head, and he felt like he was born of trouble. That first year, Cain grew at a rate that was just plain unnatural. He went from a shivering handful to the size of a full-grown Labrador in less than 6 months. His appetite was bottomless. I was going through 50 pounds of raw meat a week just to keep him fed, a mix of butcher scraps and venison from my own hunts. He was never sick, never weak. He was a perfect machine of growth. But he was nothing like a dog. He never barked. He never wagged his tail. He never showed any of the playful, submissive behaviors you'd expect from a pup. He was quiet, watchful, and deeply intelligent. My 2 border collies, Luke and Millie, were terrified of him. From day one,
They refused to even enter the barn. They'd stand at the door, whining, the hair on their backs raised, and then slink away. The barn cats, who feared nothing, gave his stall a wide berth. The whole ecosystem of my farm was thrown out of balance by his presence. He learned things too quickly. I had him in the stall, with a simple slide bolt latch on the door. One morning, I came out to find him sitting calmly in the middle of the barn aisle. The latch was slid open. I thought I must have forgotten to close it, so I put him back, made sure the bolt was firmly in place, and went about my chores. An hour later, he was out again.
I watched from the tack room, peering through a crack in the door. He stood on his hind legs, which was already strange enough, balancing with an ease that a dog just doesn't have. He reached out with his front paw, and I saw those long, finger-like digits wrap around the handle of the bolt. He didn't fumble with it. He just calmly, deliberately, slid it open and pushed the door. It was the movement of a raccoon or a monkey, not a canine. My blood ran a little cold watching that. I replaced the slide bolt with a heavy-duty carabiner clip. He figured that out in a week. I watched him do it. He used the claws on 2 of his fingers to press the gate of the clip in, while another paw pushed it off the loop. It was complex problem-solving. After that, I started using a padlock. I felt ridiculous padlocking a dog in a stall, but I didn't know what else to do. I was still telling myself he was just a very smart, very strange dog. The human brain is good at lying to itself when the truth is too much to handle. His physical development was just as bizarre. His fur stayed a dark, charcoal gray, thick and coarse. His body was lean and muscular, with long legs built for running. But it was the way he stood and moved that was most unsettling. He spent more and more time on his hind legs. At first, it was just to peer over the stall door. Then I'd find him just standing in the middle of the stall, perfectly balanced, watching me with those amber eyes. His spine was straighter than a bear's, his posture unnervingly human-like. When he did move on all fours, it wasn't the gait of a dog or a wolf. It was lower to the ground, more like a great cat, a fluid, silent motion that was incredibly efficient. I never once heard his paws on the barn floor, unless he wanted me to. I'd be working on some piece of equipment, completely alone, and I'd get that feeling of being watched. I'd turn around and he'd be standing there 10 feet away, silent as a ghost. He never showed aggression towards me, not once. But he wasn't friendly either. There was no affection, just observation. He watched everything I did. He watched me fix a tractor engine, mend a fence, clean my rifle. His head would be tilted, his eyes focused, and I got the distinct impression that he wasn't just watching, he was learning. He was committing everything to memory. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, cleaning a shotgun after a day of bird hunting. He was in the barn, but I could feel his eyes on me. On impulse, I broke the gun down, laying the pieces on a cloth, the barrel, the stock, the fore-end, the action. I cleaned each piece methodically, oiled it, and then reassembled it. The whole time I knew he was watching. The next morning I found one of my old, rusted wrenches in his stall. It was lying on a bed of clean straw, taken apart into its constituent pieces. The handle, the screw, the adjustable jaw, laid out in a neat row, mimicking the way I had laid out my shotgun parts. He hadn't damaged it. He had just disassembled it. My hands started to shake. This went beyond animal intelligence. This was something else entirely. This was analytical. This was mimicry born of understanding, not just instinct. By his second year, Cain was the size of a Great Dane, but that description doesn't do him justice. He was lankier, with a deeper chest and a visible power in his limbs that was terrifying. He could clear the 5-foot fence of the corral from a standstill without a running start. He'd do it with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and horrifying to watch. He started spending his nights outside. I couldn't keep him in the barn anymore, not really. The padlock was a token gesture. He could have ripped the door off its hinges if he'd wanted to. We developed a silent agreement. He was free to roam the property at night, but he was always back in the barn by sunrise. I never saw him leave, and I never saw him return. He was just gone, and then he was back. My livestock losses dropped to 0. The coyotes, which had always been a nuisance, picking off the occasional chicken or a weak calf, vanished. It was like a 10-mile radius of pure fear had been drawn around my farm. One night, I was woken by a hellish screaming from the woods. It wasn't the sound of any animal I knew. It was a mix of a coyote's yip, a woman's scream, and something metallic and grinding. I grabbed my rifle and went to the porch. All the lights were on, flooding the yard, but the woods were a black wall. The screaming went on for a minute, then was cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. In the morning, I found tracks at the edge of the woods. They were coyote tracks, dozens of them, all heading away from my farm, clear signs of a panicked retreat. And among them, a single set of other tracks. They were like a wolf's, but the back pad was longer, more like a heel, and in the soft mud, I could clearly see the imprint of 5 distinct digits on the front paws, one of them set apart like a thumb. That was the day I stopped calling him Cain, even in my own head. He wasn't a he was an it. And it wasn't my dog. It was something I was coexisting with, something I had foolishly invited into my life. The fear started to really take root then. It was a low-grade, constant hum in the back of my mind. I was living on the same property as a creature that was growing stronger and stranger by the day. A creature that could disassemble machinery with its bare hands and scare off an entire pack of coyotes with a single scream. I started carrying a pistol with me everywhere I went on the farm, a heavy .44 Magnum. It felt completely inadequate. What could a bullet do against something that could bend a steel padlock? Yet it never showed me any threat. It seemed to understand the boundaries. It never came near the house. It never bothered the cattle or the chickens. It just watched. Its presence was a constant weight. The woods I had known my whole life, the woods I had played in as a boy and hunted in as a man, became a source of dread. I stopped going in deep. I stuck to the edges, always looking over my shoulder. The comfortable silence of nature had been replaced by a watchful, waiting silence. It was the silence of its territory. I was no longer the master of my own land. I was just another creature living in its shadow, permitted to exist as long as I followed the unspoken rules. The 3rd year was when things came to a head. A family of black bears had moved into the area, a sow and 2 nearly grown cubs. They were bold, and they were trouble. They'd learned that farmers' trash cans were an easy meal. They tore up my neighbor's cornfield and killed one of his goats. He'd shot at them, but they were clever and kept coming back. I knew it was only a matter of time before they made their way to my place. I spent a week reinforcing the chicken coop and making sure the feed bins in the barn were secure. One afternoon, I was in the workshop sharpening a chainsaw blade when I heard the pigs start squealing. It wasn't their normal noise. This was a high, thin sound of pure terror. I dropped the file, grabbed the rifle I kept by the door, and ran outside. The sow was in the pig pen. She'd ripped 2 boards clean off the fence and was trying to corner a piglet. She was a massive animal, 400 pounds of muscle and fury. Her 2 cubs were circling the pen, excited and agitated. I raised the rifle, centered the sight on her shoulder to avoid hitting the pigs, but
I couldn't get a clean shot.
She was moving too fast, and the pigs were panicking. Then, something moved in the barn doorway, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows within. It was the creature. It stepped out into the afternoon sun, and for the first time, I saw it in its full glory, not obscured by darkness or distance. It stood on its hind legs, and it was immense, easily 7 feet tall. Its fur was the color of a thundercloud. Its legs were long and digitigrade, bent like a dog's, but the torso, arms, and shoulders were disturbingly humanoid. Its arms were long, ending in those terrible, black-clawed hands. Its head was wolf-like, but the snout was shorter, the brow heavier, and its eyes, those amber eyes, were fixed on the bear with a cold, predatory intelligence. It made no sound. It just took a step forward. The bear sow stopped, her attack on the piglet forgotten. She smelled it. She saw it. Every instinct in her ancient bear brain screamed at her. She let out a low woof, a sound of warning and fear. The 2 cubs behind her immediately stopped their circling and backed away, whining. The sow backed out of the broken fence, never taking her eyes off the creature. She grunted to her cubs, a clear command, and the 3 of them turned and crashed into the underbrush, running for their lives. The creature stood there for a long moment, watching them go. It then turned its head and looked at me. I was standing there with the rifle half raised, my knuckles white. It held my gaze for a solid 10 seconds. There was no triumph in its eyes, no pride, just a calm, flat assessment. It seemed to be communicating something, a simple fact. This is my territory. All of it. Then it dropped silently onto all 4s and flowed back into the darkness of the barn. I slowly lowered the rifle, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had just witnessed it claim my farm, my land, without making a sound or showing a single tooth. It had faced down a 400-pound bear and won through sheer presence alone. The fear I'd been living with solidified into something harder, colder. I wasn't living with a strange animal. I was living with an apex predator of a kind that wasn't supposed to exist, and I was completely at its mercy. For the next year, we lived in this strange, tense truce. The creature had established its dominance, and I had accepted my place in the hierarchy. It was a silent partnership. I provided a safe place and a steady source of food in the form of butcher scraps and deer carcasses. In return, it kept my farm safe from any and all other predators. It was a better guardian than any dog, fence, or gun. It spent most of its days in the deep woods behind the barn, but it was always back by nightfall. I'd see it sometimes at dusk, a tall, dark shape moving between the trees at the edge of the pasture, impossibly fast and silent. We had a routine. I'd leave the bucket of meat scraps just inside the barn door, and it would be gone by morning. We never interacted directly. The wall of fear and otherness was too high to cross. But I started talking to it. I don't know why. Maybe the loneliness just got to be too much. I'd be in the barn, mucking out a stall or fixing a piece of tack, and I'd just start talking out loud. I knew it was in there, in the shadows of the hayloft or a back stall, listening. I'd talk about the weather, the price of feed, a memory of Martha. I never expected a response. I was just a lonely old man talking to the monster in his barn. I felt like I was going crazy, but it was also a strange comfort. It was the only living thing that knew my secret, that shared this bizarre reality with me. It would just listen. I could feel its attention. Sometimes from the corner of my eye, I'd see its head tilted, those intelligent eyes focused on me. It was absorbing every word, every inflection. Its stillness was absolute. A dog fidgets. A cat shifts its weight. This thing could stay perfectly motionless for hours. A living statue carved from shadow and muscle. Its physical presence was overwhelming. The smell of it, that wild, musky scent of ozone and damp earth, clung to the old wood of the barn. I got used to it, the way you get used to the smell of hay and manure. It became part of the background noise of my life. But sometimes it would hit me fresh, and the sheer alienness of it would make the hair on my arms stand up. I often wondered about its life before I found it, about its mother, about what had attacked them. Were there more of them out there in the deep woods? Was it a lonely, orphaned freak, or was it a member of a hidden species, a secret society of monsters living in the margins of our world?
These thoughts would keep me up at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the farm, trying to distinguish a normal night sound from the sound of it moving outside my window. I lived in a state of constant, low-level dread. But familiarity is a strange thing. You can get used to almost anything. You can get used to the monster in your barn. You learn its habits, its boundaries. You learn to live around the fear. The sheer absurdity of my situation was not lost on me. I was a simple farmer running a small cattle operation, and I was secretly feeding and housing a creature from a nightmare. If I told anyone, they'd have me committed. So I kept my secret. The farm became my whole world, an isolated kingdom ruled by an unspoken pact between an old man and a monster. It happened on a cold night in early November, almost 4 years to the day since I'd brought the shivering pup home. A hard frost had fallen, coating every surface in a brittle layer of white.
The moon was full and bright, making the world outside look like a photograph in black and silver. I was in the barn late, doing a final check on a heifer that was close to calving. My bones were aching with the cold and a deep weariness that had nothing to do with physical labor. I finished topping off the water troughs and, instead of heading straight back to the house, I sat down on a bale of hay, just inside the big, open barn doors. I was looking out at the frosted pasture, at the black, skeletal shapes of the trees against the night sky. The air was so still you could hear the frost crackling on the tin roof. I was feeling my age that night, the loneliness of the quiet house, the endless cycle of work. It all just felt heavy. I let out a long sigh, the breath pluming white in the cold air. To no one in particular, just speaking my thoughts into the quiet, I said, "Lord, I'm tired." A voice answered from the shadows behind me. It was not a human voice. It was deep and gravelly, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a riverbed. It was a sound that vibrated in my bones more than my ears. But the words it formed were perfect, unaccented English, as clear and sharp as the frosty air. It said, "You are a good man, Silas." My heart stopped. It literally seized in my chest, and for a second I couldn't draw a breath. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I had lived alongside this creature for 4 years. I had heard it whimper as a pup. I had heard that one terrifying scream in the woods. But I had never, ever heard it speak. My mind refused to process it. It had to be the radio from the workshop, or my mind playing tricks on me. Slowly, I turned my head. It stepped out from the deep shadow of a horse stall and into the pale moonlight spilling through the doorway. It stood on its hind legs, its massive form filling the space. Its head was cocked to one side, just as it had always done when it was listening. But this was different. The intelligence in its amber eyes was no longer just an impression. It was a confirmed, terrifying fact. It had known my name. It had been listening all this time, not just as an animal, but as a being that understood language. I finally managed to suck in a ragged breath. My voice was a choked whisper. You can talk." It tilted its head the other way, a slow, deliberate movement. "We listen," it said, the words rumbling from its deep chest. "We learn." The simplicity of that statement was more chilling than any threat could have been. It wasn't a miracle. It was an observation. It was data collection. I had been its language teacher for 4 years, and I had never even known it. I sat there on the hay bale, completely frozen, my mind racing. Every conversation I'd had with myself in that barn, every muttered curse, every sad memory I'd spoken aloud, it had heard and understood all of it. The creature just stood there, patient, waiting for my paralyzed brain to catch up. It was a predator, yes, but it was also a scholar of its environment. And I was the most interesting subject it had to study. We remained in that tableau for what felt like an eternity. Me, a petrified old man on a hay bale, and it, a 7-foot-tall wolf-man creature standing in the moonlight. The initial shock began to subside, replaced by a flood of questions that had been building for 4 years. My terror was battling with a desperate, burning curiosity. This was my one chance to understand, my one chance to know what I had been living with. I had to ask. My voice was still shaky, but I forced the words out. What are you?" It didn't answer right away. It looked past me, out the barn door, toward the dark, endless sea of trees that was the national forest. Its gaze was distant, as if it were looking back through time. When it finally spoke, its voice was low and resonant, the sound of ancient history. "We are the old thing," it said. "The shadow that walks between the trees. The hunger that the fire keeps at bay. We are the reason your ancestors huddled together in the dark, and the reason they invented gods to protect them. We are the thing that hunts." Every word landed like a physical blow. This wasn't just an unknown animal. This was something woven into the fabric of human fear. The thing from every campfire story, made real. My blood was like ice in my veins, but I had to know the rest. The final, terrible question. The one that had been lurking in the deepest part of my mind ever since I saw what it did to those coyotes. The one I knew, on some level, I didn't want the answer to. I swallowed hard against the dryness in my throat. "What do you hunt?" I whispered. What do you eat?" The creature slowly turned its head back from the woods and looked directly at me. The pale moonlight reflected in its eyes, making them seem to glow from within. There was no malice in its expression, no cruelty. It was the calm, detached look of a farmer explaining the cycle of life and death. It was the most terrifying expression I have ever seen. "We eat the ones who wander," it said, its voice a flat, factual statement. "The ones who leave the path, the lost, the ones who are not missed." My mind flashed with images of missing person posters I'd seen tacked up in the post office in town. Hikers who went for a walk and never came back. Hunters who got turned around in the woods. The official explanation was always a fall, or exposure, or an animal attack. But now I knew better. Then it added one more detail. A piece of information offered freely, as if it were sharing a point of culinary preference. The detail that finally shattered the last of my composure. "We prefer the ones with hope," it said, its voice dropping to an almost conversational tone. "It seasons the meat." That was what broke me. The casual, monstrous poetry of that statement. Hope. The one thing that keeps a lost person going. The thought that they might be found, that they might survive. And this thing, this species, savored it. It was a flavor to them. I think I screamed then. I don't remember making the sound, but I remember the raw, tearing feeling in my throat. I scrambled backward off the hay bale, tripping over my own feet, landing hard on the cold, dirt-packed floor of the barn. The spell was broken. The 4 years of coexistence, the strange truce, the lonely companionship, it all evaporated in an instant. This wasn't Cain. This wasn't my strange, silent guardian. This was a monster that ate people. People who were lost and scared and clinging to hope. And I had fed it. I had sheltered it. I had raised it from a pup. The creature watched me scrabble away from it in the dirt, my hands searching for purchase, my legs refusing to work properly. And for the very first time in 4 years, I saw it display a clear emotion. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hunger. Its expression in the cold moonlight was one of disappointment, as if I had failed some kind of test, as if, after all this time, it had expected better of me. That look was worse than any snarl or growl could have been. It was a judgment. It held my terrified gaze for a moment longer, and then it turned. It didn't rush. It didn't flee. It simply turned its back on me, and with a fluid, silent grace that defied its massive size, it walked out of the barn and into the night. I watched its tall, dark silhouette cross the frosted pasture and disappear into the black wall of the woods. It never looked back. I lay there on the cold ground for a long time, shaking uncontrollably, the monster's last words echoing in my head. It seasons the meat. The barn, which had been my workspace and a place of refuge for my entire life, suddenly felt alien and menacing. Its shadows were no longer empty. They were filled with the memory of what I had harbored within them. Eventually, the cold seeped deep into my bones, and I managed to get to my feet. I stumbled back to the house, locking the door behind me for the first time in 40 years. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my kitchen with the lights on, my shotgun across my lap, watching the tree line until the sun came up. It never came back. The bucket of scraps I'd left out remained untouched. The barn was empty. The oppressive, watchful silence returned to the woods. But now I knew what it meant. It wasn't empty. It was just waiting. The next morning, I called the sheriff. My hands were still shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I didn't tell him the truth, of course. I told him a bear had been on my property. A big one. Unnaturally aggressive. I said it had tried to get into my barn and that I'd scared it off. Sheriff Brody, who I've known since he was a boy, came out to the farm. He was a good man, practical, like me. He walked the property, looked at the pig pen the bear had damaged months ago, which I pointed to as new evidence. He saw no tracks he could identify in the hard, frozen ground. He looked at me, saw the state I was in, the wild look in my eyes, the tremor in my hands, and I think he just figured the isolation was finally getting to me. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Silas," he said, "you're probably just spooked. A big old bear can do that to a man. You keep that shotgun handy and shoot me a call if you see it again. But I reckon it's moved on." He was sympathetic but dismissive, and I couldn't blame him. How could I tell him the truth? How could I explain that I had raised a dogman for 4 years and that it had spoken to me about its diet of hopeful humans? They would have put me in a white coat and locked me in a soft room. So I just nodded and thanked him for coming out. From that day on, my life changed. The peace I had always found on my land was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing fear. I sold off most of my cattle, keeping just enough to manage on my own. It was too much work, and it kept me out in the open for too long. I stopped walking the back 40. The woods that had been my backyard were now a foreign country, a hostile territory ruled by something ancient and hungry. I reinforced the doors and windows on my house. I installed floodlights that bathed the yard in a harsh, artificial glare from dusk till dawn. I never go out after dark. The nights are the worst. Sometimes, when the wind is right, I think I can smell that faint, musky odor on the breeze. And sometimes I hear sounds from the deep woods, sounds that don't belong to any known animal. I see the missing person flyers in town now, and they feel like a punch to the gut. A college kid who went camping and vanished. A woman whose car broke down on a lonely road. I look at their smiling faces and I feel sick. I wonder if they were lost. I wonder if they were scared. And I can't stop myself from wondering if they were full of hope right before the end. I'm telling this story now because I'm an old man and I don't have much time left. And I can't bear the thought of taking this secret to the grave. People need to know. The world you live in, the one with streetlights and traffic and clear rules, it's a thin veneer. Just beyond the edges, in the dark places, in the deep woods, older things are waiting. They are patient, they listen, and they learn. So please, listen to an old farmer who saw something he shouldn't have. Stay on the path. Stay in the light. And if you ever find yourself lost in the woods, and you feel that surge of hope when you think you see a rescuer, pray that you're right. Pray it isn't just the seasoning.